So I buy a Model Y with FSD. That makes sense, right? You have a Model Y, and it's got this autonomous capability. But what he's saying is that he's going to sell millions of the Cybercab, this stripped down car, all plastic inside with shitty seats. So who's going to make the devil's advocate argument why those sell?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of At the Wheel with me, Joe White of the High Speed Rodeo Substack, to Lee of Sino Auto Insights, who's working things behind the curtain there. And today we are joined for a look at the year past and the year ahead, a special edition, hopefully by Steve Levine, who writes the electric newsletter for the information, and by Paul Leinert, who I think is on screen. And he is managing director of Leinert and Company, and he's a longtime analyst and student of the auto industry. I worked with Paul at Reuters. He's been doing this a really long time and knows a lot. I think we're going to have a good time. Look, it's been a busy year in the world of cars, to say the least. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about China, Donald Trump, Tesla, and technology, and we're going to have plenty left over. Hopefully, we're going to be able to let you post questions in the chat, and we will try to answer some of those later on. Just a quick reminder, we all have a lot to say. We got a lot of opinions. None of them should be taken as investment advice. So preparing for the show, we talked about setting up 3 or 4 buckets to contain this very large number of topics that we could get to in a discussion about the past year in the auto sector and the mobility industry. And then in the middle of that discussion yesterday, Ford dropped news that it would scrap nearly all its previously planned future EV projects, restructure its Blue Oval City electric vehicle complex, kill the F-150 Lightning, and take a $19.5 billion charge to reflect the costs and the lost investments in their EV strategy. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to get to some other things as well. Now, it looks like we still don't have Steve. Paul, what did you make of what Ford did here? I mean, I've got my thoughts, but I kind of want to hear from both of you first. It's not the biggest charge any auto company has ever taken for a failed strategy, but it's pretty darn big. What do you think? What do you think is going on here, and what do you think caused this to happen today? Ford, Paul, what do you think about what they did?
It's a whopper of a write-down with all sorts of implications, but particularly kind of setting the table for the rest of the auto business here in the United States and probably over in Europe as well, just to kind of reboot all their plans for electric vehicles.
Yeah, I agree too. If we get Steve on, I'm going to ask him, but I agree that basically it was a signal that, look, to both the U.S. regulators have already abandoned the Biden administration EV targets. I mean, the Trump administration just within the last few weeks officially said, we're not going to have EV mandates or quotas. We're going to keep fuel economy rules pretty much where they're at. I mean, very minor increases over the next several years. So, they've basically scrapped the pro EV policies of the previous administration. Europeans, I think, as we speak, are climbing down from their proposal to ban combustion vehicle sales by 2035. I mean, that was expected to happen officially today. So I do think this is Ford signaling, look, this EV, I'll probably get in trouble for saying it this way, but this kind of EV bubble that started expanding when Tesla started to make money with the Model 3 and the Model Y, and its valuation went to the moon, that this phase of the EV transition is kind of over. And we're going to have something very different, at least in the United States, and I think in Europe as well. But two, I mean, when you look at this from this perspective, put yourself in the shoes of the Chinese auto industry. I mean, what does this mean for Ford's competitiveness and potentially, Western automakers' competitiveness with the Chinese auto industry?
There's a couple things.
Go ahead, Sue.
There's a couple things that I'm still not sure of with regards to the Ford situation in particular, about their competitiveness in the United States and in the rest of the world, because they also announced earlier, I think last week that they were, or 2 weeks ago, that they were doing a partnership with Renault on small cars. Now, I was on that, right. I was on that call yesterday and I raised my hand, wasn't able to ask my question, but they also have this low cost universal platform. And that is only going to be for the United States. So they have multiple prongs, in my opinion. They have the partnership with Renault, and then they have this low cost universal platform. Does that play in China? Because if it doesn't play in China, then that really doesn't help them long term. Welcome, Steve.
All right.
Apologies for booting you out. You must be about to say something very controversial because Riverside wasn't allowing you to be on the platform until now. Anyways, so I want to be clear about, okay, where does Renault fit in? Where does that IP fit in to the global strategy? And, if it's just Europe, then it seems like they still don't have a China strategy because they want to be a global automaker. And does this low cost universal platform, the question I wanted to ask them, does this low cost universal platform play in China? Because if not, then they're trying to address two markets, but not the largest market in the world. So
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Steve. But yeah, I don't know if we were talking about Ford and the big, what looks like a pretty significant retreat, not a total retreat, but a pretty significant retreat from their electric vehicle strategy. I mean, when you look at what they said and what they're doing, I mean, what do you make of it? I mean, it's probably a bunch of different takes you could have, but what's your take
Yeah.
from your perspective?
First,
from what
am
they've
I
done?
on good speed? I sound normal? All right, good.
Yeah, you
All
sound
right,
normal.
so
So carry
Yeah.
on.
you
Make the
guys
best of
probably
it.
covered
Act now.
a lot of this, but two comments about it is that Ford, the industry as a whole, and now Ford, the U.S. industry has decided to ring fence itself, that it can focus on combustion models, and not compete with the Chinese. That's one. That's one point. I'd love to hear what Joe, you, and Paul, what you think about that strategy. But the other one is on what Tu just said regarding Renault. So Jim Farley, when he announced the Renault deal, said that the Skunk Works Universal platform wouldn't fly in Europe. That's why they made the deal in with Renault. The price was too high and the vehicle was too big.
So it's not universal.
Yeah, well, yeah,
It's the U.S.
it's universal within
for
the
the
United
US.
Right.
States.
If it doesn't fly,
Semi-universal.
in Europe,
So, yeah.
how does it
Well,
fly
I
in
mean, because
China?
come on, we're the universe, right? Steve,
That
I want to.
universal EV platform is interesting because it's not just about the vehicle, it's not just about the platform, it's also about how it's going to be put together, which is kind of a whole different way. It's not the traditional moving assembly line. So pieces of that process may be able to be migrated to China and other markets, if not the platform itself. On the Ford Renault deal, I thought that was intriguing because Ford, as we know, already has an EV sharing deal with Volkswagen in Europe. And that doesn't seem to be going very well in Europe, and I don't think it holds any promise whatsoever for China. So the Ford Renault deal is for a smaller EV platform, presumably more affordable, quote unquote. Neither Ford nor Renault has much clout in China at the moment. So who knows what the potential is over there.
Yeah, Steve, and I'm going to take up your challenge to kind of talk about the ring fencing or that concept. And I think I started covering the industries toward the end of the period in which the U.S. automakers, the Detroit automakers, were protected or theoretically protected from then surging Japanese competition, Toyota, Honda, mainly Toyota, Honda, Nissan, by voluntary, the so-called voluntary export restraints or voluntary export quotas. And essentially the Japanese automakers pretty much had to abide by a limited quota on the number of vehicles they shipped to the United States. And this was under the Reagan administration. It was essentially protectionism by another name. What happened? Well, we all know it. Well, most people listening to us know what happened. What happened is the Japanese companies moved onshore. They brought their production system and their technology to the United States, set up factories here, and have been highly competitive ever since. I mean, Toyota from time to time, I think, I'm not quite sure where they're at now, but they're pretty much the number 2 seller in the United States, on the number 2 brand in the United States in terms of market share. So they were able to get behind, get over the wall or through the wall and compete. Maybe Chinese automakers will be forever frozen out of the United States. Maybe no governor, no president will ever allow a Chinese automaker to set up a factory to employ Americans within America to build vehicles for this market. Maybe, but maybe not. I mean, again, I can remember, again, early on in my career here, when there was kind of an assumption amongst the Detroit automakers that, the Japanese companies are going to come to the United States. Their factories will be organized by the UAW, and they'll be in the same fix that we're in terms of labor costs and productivity. Well, that wasn't the case, right, Paul? I mean, it just those assumptions did not pan out.
And honestly, that's un-American to be so protectionist. That what I feel, and I strongly feel, and I think if you gentlemen all got behind the wheel of a lot of these cars, you would feel very similar, that these are the most competitive clean energy vehicles in the world. In generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
some are better than others, but we're talking viable brands that would do well in the North American market, the BYDs, the Geelys, the Cherries,
Xiaomi.
Not these one-offs that everybody seems to be crying about.
Well, and it's interesting.
I have a question. Aren't the Chinese already building cars in the U.S.? Tell me about the Volvo plant.
Well, right. Right. I mean, not right. Steve, maybe you're, I mean, my impression is that, so right, Volvo is a Chinese owned company, and they're building in the United States. But the Chinese brands, it seems like they are doing the work to become visible in this country. I mean, if you go on YouTube, there's Marcus Brownlee reviewing a Xiaomi and gushing all over it. I mean, so it seems like within the world of tech and on the West Coast, that there's an awareness of Chinese brands in the U.S. It's not like nobody knows what they could be getting if only the barriers were taken down, right? I mean, they're out there.
So also, since we're talking year in review, I was at IAA in Munich, which is the European auto show every year. It rotates between Munich and Paris. And between 2 years ago and this year, there was 40% more participation from Chinese companies. And so we're talking not only OEMs, but tier ones as well. So they're making their way headfirst into the European market, not only via exports, because we all talk about exports, but if you think about BYD, we think about Great Wall, Chery, a few other brands, they're building factories in Europe and Spain, specifically Eastern Europe a little bit, and CATL has a battery factory in Germany. So all these things are happening, and they're going to be an established player as a group within the next 5 years in Europe.
Yeah, and they'll have potentially have an export platform from Europe.
Exactly. And will the U.S. allow Chinese-made cars from Europe, or will they have similar restrictions?
Will they have somebody at the port saying, "Wait a minute, I know what that is. You can't fool me." Gosh, we keep losing Steve, and I'm just going to apologize to him and to viewers because maybe we'll hopefully we'll get him back. This seems like a pretty good time to segue to talking about China as China and what is happening in the Chinese market. And I'm going to kind of count on you to lead this. It seems like there's Steve again. Steve, sorry we keep losing you. I mean, we're talking about the Chinese market now, as such, not necessarily in the context of Ford. There's been a lot going on. Where is the Chinese auto market right now? Is it in a state of, collapse because pricing has gone irrational? Is it in a state of, kind of constructive shakeout where the powerful players are going to emerge and take over the world? I mean, kind of where are we? Where is that market? Where are those players?
For longtime followers of Sino Auto Insights, China EVs and more, I've said this story before. I've told this story before. 2009, when I first moved to China, I was told, whatever sales is, double that, and that's capacity in China. And from day one, I was also told that there's going to be consolidation. You gentlemen have covered it for years. The speculation on too many brands, too much capacity. It is different this time because China is export, okay? And it definitely feels like the countries that are being exported to, specifically the Mexicos, parts of Europe, and Latin America, are really, really feeling the brunt of a lot of those exports. Europe is pushing back. Mexico is increasing their tariffs to 50%. And this is the difference between, 2009 when I first moved to China and now. We're seeing some of the unease because of the exports. That being said, we will be in year 4 of a price war that Tesla started in 2022 in about a month, year 4. And so we talk about this involution word that is kind of made up by the Chinese, that they're eating each other because it's so competitive and there's so much capacity. And the actual pressure release valve for a lot of the players, which in other markets would probably be top 10 players, right? They struggle in China just because BYD, Geely, Chery, they take so much, they suck so much air out of the room. Now, 2026, some more subsidies are going away. So we should start to see a little bit settling. This is, and Paul, you had sent us in the group chat that Tesla's going to be at an all-time high, when in 2025, sales are going to be in a 3-year low.
It's crazy. But Wall Street is not looking at Tesla as a car company anymore, are they?
Yeah, I think Elon has convinced them that. But if we're, again, talking about China, because I'm always relating other world news through the lens of what I see and hear in China. And we can look at Rivian's AI Day as, you heard KOLs in the crowd go, woo, woo. You know what? Chinese companies are like, been there, done that. We're designing our own silicon. We are creating a seamless user experience. All the buzzwords that I think Western folks and analysts are new to, but is just the daily grind in China. And then if you look at Tesla, they say a lot, but they're not doing as much, because within the last couple of days, the Chinese government has approved level 3 for 2 or 3 companies, and there's going to be more Chinese EV companies that are going to be launching level 3 plus systems in 26 and beyond.
And level 3, for those who don't know, is a level of advanced driving assistance systems, right? Kind of a pre-autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Is full self-driving, Tesla's full self-driving, which is not full, isn't that close to a level 3 system, or is that more level 2.5?
Their lawyers will tell you it's not a level 3 system.
Lawyers will tell you it's level 2.
Elon will tell you it's a level 5 system.
Yeah. Can I come in on this Tesla thing?
Steve.
I just wonder, is this group, you guys made the comment, Paul, you did, that Wall Street doesn't regard Tesla as a car company anymore. But are we ready to buy into that? So they've let their car their car segment go. It's in decline, not producing new models, and throwing everything into robotaxis and robots. Now, we being neutrals, is that real? Is that does that really go? Is that really going to happen?
Yeah. Well, it's not real yet. I mean, that's it's not real yet. I mean,
and so let me stop you there, Joe. For everyone else that's listening, we are moving on to the Tesla portion of the show.
Okay, yeah, I guess we are. It's look, it's not. If you just look at their financial statement, right? I mean, and I'm not, I didn't go to B school, but you can look at their financial statement, and I don't know if it's 80% or probably might be 90%, but certainly the bulk of their revenue is generated by electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are their core business. If you look and say, well, what do? Their core business is electric vehicles. And now, I mean, I get it, especially in Silicon Valley, right? That there's the concept of the pivot, and you make the leap, the Netflix, you go from sending discs to people to selling, streaming, and there's a leap you make. I don't see Tesla making that leap. I see them too. You said it. They talk a lot, but they're not delivering anything. And so that's where I'm at with that. It's like, I'll believe it when I see it, and I'll believe the revenue generation possibilities of their AI products when I see it.
So, Joe, you talked about cars being Tesla's core business, which in fact it still is, in a year in which its car sales are down in nearly every major global market. So, and yet the market cap keeps going up. I think it's going to hit 1.6 trillion today or early next week. How is that even possible?
Yeah, Steve, from where you sit, is there an explanation for that? We're clearly not seeing something that investors are seeing.
The market has bought into Elon's narrative. So really, it's, that's where we come on this. Of course, it hasn't happened yet, but do we think that his robotaxis, are going to be as big as he says? Is he going to get that passenger out of the car? Is it going to stop being ring fenced? Is it going to be able to go anywhere? Is he going to be able to sell millions of these vehicles? You can tell I'm highly skeptical. I think it's a huge gamble. Basically, he's thrown away the company. I really think that he has. And humanoid robots. When you talk to humanoid robot companies, no one knows exactly what's going on inside Tesla with Optimus, but they know what's going on with their own robots, and they're not ready. They're not ready for what Elon says they're going to do. Yeah. So if he were willing to put radar on the robotaxis, then I could see, yeah. But he's going.
You make a really good point, because I think he likes to talk about his robotaxis as if Waymo and, for that matter, Rivian and the Chinese companies don't exist, right? One of the interesting things from Rivian's automation presentation a few days ago was the extent to which they emphasized that they believe you have to have LiDAR, radar, and cameras, right? One of the things that I think, this is not really a prediction because I think it is happening. One of the things that Elon, I think, could find himself up against is Rivian. And I'm just going to talk about the United States. China's a different deal too. But for regulatory purposes, he is going to find himself being lobbied against, or up against lobbying from Rivian and Waymo. We're going to tell regulators in California and in NHTSA in Washington and wherever, Tesla's system isn't safe. It's not robust. They don't have enough sensors to do the job. We do. And I think that's something that, and again, this stuff, I'm at the limit of my technical understanding here, but it seems to me that if you come in with to regulators who are clearly fearful of approving something that winds up hurting people or being bad for society, if you come in and tell them, we've got belts, suspenders, and paper clips, and that guy is running around with a loose waistband and has no redundancy, I think that's a problem for Tesla. So we'll see.
So let me interject here. It's a binary question to me that I posted to the audience. First of all, real or not real? Second, if you believe it to be real, you have to look at the competitors in the space. And Steve, you had mentioned the humanoid. So there are a number of humanoid companies in the United States. And then this $1.6 trillion valuation, how much of that is attributed to the China market? Because they're in complete retreat in the China market. From a car sales standpoint, they don't have full FSD. They have Pony, they have WeRide, they have QCraft, they have Deep Route, they have Momenta. That's just the AV startups. Xpeng has a level 2 system. Li Auto has a level 2. Xiaomi has a level BYD, and it's giving it for free. So if we do believe that they're real, do we believe that they're going to dominate the China market? Because completely that's unreal, because they're not going to dominate the China market.
I'm hearing you guys talk about Tesla, and I think I can summarize it by saying Tesla appears to be Silicon Valley's greatest ever story stock, meme stock even. But I think in China, the bloom is off their rose in China, rapidly coming off their rose in Europe. The U.S., I think they're still being propped up heavily by U.S. investors, but how much longer can Elon keep that story going?
FSD is formidable. It is a real awesome technology, but as a car company, is Tesla worth 1.6? Are they looking at, and we had talked about this offline just before we got online, if Teslas all get Starlink as an option or a standard, that helps FSD, that helps Starlink and SpaceX. Now that helps Elon Inc. But if he's not selling, because what, just 3 years ago he was talking about 20 million units. So Waymo is going to be, I think, in 60 cities or close to 60 cities by the end of next year, and multiple four-season cities, including Detroit, which I'm looking really forward to. But is Tesla there yet? No. And if you look at, and Joe, we talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago, the Middle East is going to be a battleground. Europe's going to be a battleground because they're basically bystanders. They don't have a horse in the race on autonomy. And I think that's going to be the telling thing, because I think Waymo and the Chinese are going to be really, really aggressive with that.
So, too, you raise an interesting question. If Waymo's going to be in all those cities, is it going to be in a lot of Chinese cars in all those cities? Is it going to use Zeekr cars in those cities from Geely?
Well, they're shipping Zeekr robotaxis or robo vans from China right now, and I think they're getting outfit in Silicon Valley. You're seeing them on roads in LA, and so this is where it's a little weird. We can't have passenger vehicles because of the Biden administration stuff, but this is where I think Waymo is probably they're mitigating risk, because they also have now the Ioniq 5 as a level 4 test vehicle. So we'll start to see them in CES and things like that. So Joe, maybe there's an opportunity to try an Ioniq 5 when we're at CES. But Waymo, well, Alphabet, I won't say Waymo. Alphabet has as big of a wallet as anybody in Silicon Valley. And I don't think they're going to let Waymo fail. And if we think about 2026, we got to think about Waymo as an IPO. How big is that IPO going to be? Is it going to be anywhere close to 1.6 trillion? Probably not. How much of that valuation, if Tesla is an AI and robotics company, how much of it is going to be attributed to the robotaxi side? How much of it is going to be attributed to the humanoid side? Because you would think Waymo would be whatever that same percentage is that we think Tesla is going to be.
You'd think.
Yeah,
You'd think.
no.
Steve,
I think it's worth it.
You're sitting there pretty patient. You have something to say, man?
No, dude.
Come
Don't
at
even
me.
start.
You disagree? Come at me, man.
But if all right, we're all on one track, right? we're all skeptic. Okay, can anyone make the devil's advocate argument why the cyber cab sells like hotcakes? That's the argument, right? So I buy a Model Y with FSD. That makes sense, right? You have a Model Y, and it's got this autonomous capability. But what he's saying is that he's going to sell millions of the cyber cab, this stripped down car, all plastic inside with shitty seats. So who's going to make the devil's advocate argument why those sell?
So
that keeps the factories running. That keeps the factories running.
Yeah, but that's not. But Steve's point is to make the devil's advocate argument that this is actually going to find that these vehicles will find a customer and a buyer. I mean, you can run the factories, but at some point when you carpet your lots with unsold vehicles, you got to stop. All right, I'll try. Okay, and I'm just going to say that I think I have a lot of I think the idea is right. I mean, the idea is that these cyber cabs will drop the cost of getting from A to B so dramatically that it will make no economic sense for you as a person, or maybe for you as a business that wants to deliver an object or a good from one place to another, or maybe deliver a package from one part of town to the other. It will make no sense for you to hire a human driver and a human vehicle. It's just so much cheaper to stick yourself or your package in a robocab. Okay, the problem I have with that is one, I think even delivery is a fairly complex matter. I mean, all you have to do is look at how do you get a package from the front door of a 20-story condo complex to the top floor when your recipient is a stoner who's in his jammies, on
Optimus.
his fifth
Optimus,
joint.
Joe.
No, Optimus isn't going to climb the stairs or take the elevator either. Anyway, years ago, my daughter delivered pizzas and whatnot in Boston, and that was her use case, was delivering munchies to stoners on the 15th floor of condo complexes in Boston. And a human being has to do that kind of stuff. Two, this is a cultural observation that I hope I live long enough to determine whether I was right or wrong. I think in the United States, I think it's going to be really hard to convince people to forego a personally owned automobile. I mean, like today, after we do this, I may decide to do one of two or three things. I may go to Home Depot. I may decide to go pick up a, Christmas present that's waiting for me at a store a few miles away. I may take a random trip to a coffee shop. I may do all these things. I'm going to do them on my schedule when I feel like it at this rate of, I'm going to control that. I don't want to be beholden to sitting around waiting for a robotaxi to do this random series of errands. Anyway, I just think that culturally in this country, it's a hard sell.
Joe, what about the case for individual passenger cars with level 4 capability?
Yeah, that's I think
Doesn't
of that
that
as,
answer your question?
Well, I think of that as
Gentlemen.
Automate Nebraska. If you drive across the country, please automate Nebraska.
There's an immediate challenge that needs to be addressed. We talk about vehicle ownership. MSRPs are going the wrong way, so no one's going to be able to afford them.
Well, you think putting a bunch of LiDAR in vehicles is going to solve that problem? That's the other question
I think, so I've said this in conferences before where car companies are actually just great marketers and they sell wholesale. They don't sell to the customer. They sell to a dealer.
Yep,
and so
true.
they don't ever touch the customer. And because cars have gotten bigger, they've been able to add margin, add revenue. And so the mind fuck is they've convinced us that bigger equals freedom, that driving ourselves equals freedom. Now they've dug themselves in a hole because in order to keep all these factories humming, they need to build small cars. You see Farley talking about it. You see GM with the Equinox and the Blazer. So does that mean more affordable? Maybe. And now they're going to have to convince us that they're great at building small cars. They've conceded that to the Koreans and the Japanese in the United States.
For years and years, the Detroit mantra has been, we can't make money on small cars. And it wasn't until I got in much deeper discussions sometime back with Korean companies and Japanese companies who said, we're making money. What's the issue here? So I don't know where the truth lies. It's probably somewhere in between. I shuddered when Steve was talking about a cyber cab with, what did you say, a cheap plastic interior? I can visualize that.
I think he said shitty seats.
Will people buy it?
Or will companies buy them? Steve, isn't that the real question?
But how much will they really cost to build? I guess that's the conundrum in my mind. We heard Tesla a couple years ago talk about an unboxed assembly process, basically doing modules in parallel and putting them all together like a Lego puzzle at the end of the line. Is that going to really make the Cybercab or something of that ilk much cheaper to build? Will it make it cheaper to build than what China's already doing?
Even if
I'm not convinced.
Let's say companies and cab companies and Bill down the street, buys the Cybercab, right? Puts together a fleet, and you get Cybercabs, or maybe the Cybercab is a platform and they put something on top. It becomes an Amazon delivery van. The narrative is he's selling millions of these per year. Even if he sells some, does he sell millions a year? That's the question.
No, the commercial fleet market is not. I mean, RJ Scaringe was on an Automotive News' Shift podcast. I want to shout out to them. And he was asked, it seems like the commercial electric van market has not developed as rapidly as you had expected. Steve, it sounds like you heard this or you know this, right? And he said at first, and he's doing the best of anybody, at least in the United States, with this type of product. But he said no, it has not developed as quickly. It's a smaller market overall to begin with. And second of all, and I'm paraphrasing him pretty loosely here, he said, Amazon is figuring out how to work EVs into their commercial fleet, but the rest of the fleet world has not. And he pointed out something that is kind of obvious the minute you think about it. There's really only a very few large delivery fleet operators out there. Amazon's one of them. FedEx is another. UPS is a third. I guess DHL. And then from there, you're in the world that Ford serves quite well with the combustion transit van, which is, Horton Plumbing, here in the town I live in Michigan, maybe 10, 15 at the most, that kind of thing. So there's a few very large, thousands very small. That market, I don't see where the volume is.
Yeah. So the forecast
millions, no.
Okay, I was just going to say, so the
And
forecast
the other
is
important
that
Go ahead, Steve.
the Tesla narrative is a washout.
Well, here in this group,
it's historically been like that.
Yeah, but obviously,
nothing's changed.
Obviously, there are some people, a fair number of people with a lot of money and a lot of sway on the market, on the New York Stock Exchange or the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, who think we're stupid. So go figure,
But here's a couple of wrinkles that give Tesla a better chance than, let's say, the legacies, because we are debating and talking about the year in review with regards to Tesla and the automakers. You'd mentioned Amazon. We talked a little bit about Waymo, but these are technology companies. They're not automotive companies. They don't think about car making. They think about services, data, and then Tesla, amongst the car makers at $1.6 trillion, they're borrowing money for free. Whereas $19 billion write-down, although, Joe, you had mentioned that it's a $5 billion cash write-down.
It's about if I read it right, it's $5.5 billion cash. But let's not minimize either of those numbers, right? The loss to I see a question which we'll come to maybe. The loss to investors is substantial, and the cash loss to the company is substantial. $5.5 billion is, 5 to 10 product programs, and large ones. So none of it is trivial.
And
none of it was done lightly.
And a reminder that GM wrote that down, a part cash, part on the books in China with their SAIC joint venture earlier this year.
And by the way, as a side note, Ford stock is up this morning. They're probably all those Tesla investors, right?
Well, I've got a thought about that. I think GM was ahead of Ford on this. And by the way, I think GM has more write-downs to do itself. But I think the stock is probably up because the investors look at Ford and say, okay, finally, these folks are going to do what we want them to do, which is stop wasting money on future technology and EVs and get back to producing combustion trucks that would be recognizable to a time traveler from the 90s and send us the cash. I don't know.
Mary's been very good about that the last 3 years to her shareholders that way. She's been very good the last 3 or 5
years.
Guys,
Ford's been paying a much better dividend, I think.
On this quickly before we switch to questions. Just circling back to the very beginning, at least where I came in, the Detroit and the European strategy, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, EREVs, minimum of EVs, ring fencing. Can you have, is it possible that strategy succeeds, right? That you have parallel approaches. China's going all in on EVs and plug-ins, and the rest of the world is EREVs, plug-in hybrids, and almost no EVs.
What do you think? Or Paul?
This sounds like General Custer and Little Bighorn writ large. Sorry.
What do you think? I have thoughts, but go ahead.
I think it's use case specific. I think EREVs and plug-in hybrids will play a role in the United States just because the different use cases we have long term. So my theory is that within 15 years, building an EV becomes a commodity. I tweeted or X'd or whatever you want to call it that Volkswagen Group now has a U.S. strategy that includes using Rivian IP, a China strategy that includes using Xpeng IP, and then question mark on European strategy. And I have an idea of who they're going to use, but if and I'm oversimplifying this, but if Volkswagen only brings manufacturing to the table, does that make them a contract manufacturer? Again, because they don't own the relationship with the customer. And if Rivian gets to see all this data, Xpeng gets to see all this data, they're not creating the experience. I mean, Volkswagen is not creating the experience. Xpeng and Rivian are. And it bolsters their own branded vehicles now because they can include that data in their calculations for their brands. And so if vehicle manufacturing is commoditized because it's a platform and a top hat. And we know that China can do that in 18 months. The legacies can't do that. Tesla can't do it, or they would have shown that they can do it. And so what's the next for them? Is it AI and robotics like Tesla? Because none of the legacies have talked about humanoids. They've talked about intelligent driving. And Rivian has taken a step further and brought in the whole your car can effectively make some money for itself, but that's a different show. I just don't know. They're talking about powertrains, and it's not even about powertrains anymore.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
well, that was certainly one. And before we get to the end of our time, I think the way I want to answer this is by kind of briefly getting to the topic that was on our list. And I'll do it this way. I mean, there's so much risk here, and not least is the risk that Donald Trump and people who agree with Donald Trump and Donald Trump's people about the right approach to transportation and climate policy will not forever be in power. And that in 3.5 years or 7.5 years, you'll have in the United States, once again, an administration that believes that climate change is a substantial problem that needs to be addressed through regulation, particularly, or not regulation of carbon emitting industries, not least of them being the car companies. So there's that, right? That if you just say we're going to sell combustion or some version of combustion, and we're not going to invest in carbon-free transport, that they'll wake up and there'll be a president, President Gavin Newsom or whoever, right, who will say, sorry, guys, guess what? We believe in climate change again, and we're going to regulate you all, and it's going to be a problem. Just as I don't think the car companies reckoned when President Trump regained office, that he was serious about, tariffs and kind of the disruptive way that he and his people have gone about that. So, I do think that there's more black swans than you can point your gun at. And I think that's the risk for these companies, that if they're not nimble, they're not only subject to competition risk, but they're also subject to policy risk. And I wonder how they're going to try to immunize themselves against
guys, that. I definitely want to end soon, but one thing we omitted completely was the supply chain stuff, the silicon and the rare earth magnets. I think we should talk about that year in review a little bit, because it became so important towards the end of this year. And maybe Steve, why don't you give us your thoughts on Nexperia and some of the rare earth stuff, and then you start, and then we'll add our 2 cents before we head off to questions.
China has shown, just like we're willing, the U.S. is willing to pull the trigger on chips, it's willing to pull the trigger on rare earths. This is a terrible metaphor, but we've dug ourselves a hole, and we're it's not right. It's going to take us a long time to get out of it.
And there was nothing there.
I think we're going to have to, in the end, we're going to have to deal with the Chinese. The Chinese have got this supply chain, and that's the raw ore, and it's the processing of it. And so I don't see any complete answer apart from we can't wall ourselves off from the Chinese supply chain.
Totally agree. I think I'm sort of a dreamer. I'd like to believe that somewhere down the line, we not only invent but perfect a different sort of battery, maybe sodium sulfur, and I'm making that up right now, potassium ion, I don't know, that doesn't rely on the existing supplies for batteries, where we're not so dependent on China. But who knows what else China is looking at tying up right now, locking up, from mining to refining, as you said, Steve.
Need I remind everyone, and among this group I don't, but we could have developed that emerging technology, Paul, over the last 5 years. And because there's no immediate return or no immediate path to return, we've set it aside. And this is the challenge of having administrations change every 4 and 8 years. And Bob Gallion could be front and center talking about how we gave up this nascent technology that has now, even Ford yesterday talked about moving from battery electric vehicle batteries to BESS, or battery energy storage. And they're going from NMC pouch
I want to interject.
LFP prismatic.
This is parenthetical
that,
too, so I'm not interrupting you. Just noting that when Ford announced last night prismatic LFP with SK, CATL technology. SK does not know how to make, learned last night, doesn't know how to make LFP. That's incredible. CATL.
Yes. So where are they going to get the technology from, Steve?
Yeah.
CATL.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if they're allowed to, if they don't get bushwhacked again from Washington, which happened to their plan to joint venture with CATL here in Michigan, they got sledgehammered by Congress and by the administration, and that whole thing kind of
is that
went off the
my
rails.
understanding is that
and should I remind everyone?
Live. Yes, it was sledgehammered.
Go ahead, Joe.
But the Marshall plant is live, and they're expanding.
Oh yes, you're right. No, it's been scaled down, but it's live. But I guess I will stand by the sledgehammering. I think they definitely got sledgehammered, and they had to do a whole bunch of stuff to kind of minimize the CATL involvement.
To echo Joe, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, because isn't that kind of sort of what happened to GM, how they went from NMC pouch to now prismatic with the Ultium platform, because they could not mass produce NMC using pouch. And early days, Steve, you know this, people were wondering why they chose pouch, and they thought they were smart enough to get it done. Now, Kurt Kelty was not part of that team. And so I'm hoping that they see some clarity quickly, because both Ford and GM, Paul, to your point earlier, they're leaning heavily into LMR, heavily, as being the game-changing chemistry. And Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Manganese is not a magic ingredient. I still think we're going to see a bigger shift to lithium.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that if they can make,
go ahead, Steve.
Science isn't done yet. I mean, there's still problems, I understand, with making that work, making the LMR batteries work, manganese-rich batteries work. But if they can, and Paul, maybe you and I can come back to this in a year, it really would change the game, right? Then you push, you do, if you establish manganese processing in the United States. That's the one missing ingredient. But if you do accomplish, Paul, what you raised, you do have a different battery from the Chinese supply chain. Hey, can I throw one quick thing in to you, Paul, and to you, Joe, and it's this. You guys covered this industry, way before I did, and way before two did. You look at, Joe, your book, and the Halberstam book, and Bill Vlasic's book, and this, decade after decade, Detroit's been screwing it up. So,
don't pull your punches, Steve.
Yeah.
Is that what you wrote in your book, Joe? Detroit keeps screwing it up.
Ahead.
What? So, I mean, what's
That's a
going
short
on
version.
in that context? Are they just fated? You guys both fated forever to just screw it up? Like, what's going on?
You first, Joe.
Yeah, I think, and again, people like Jim Farley, I think Jim Farley's probably been the most overt about saying some version of what I'm about to say. I mean, these are big bureaucratic organizations. There's no reward for taking risk and failing. I mean, they say there is, but there isn't. So they know what works, right? And they know, and frankly, what works is body on frame V8 engine or large displacement combustion engine rear drive trucks. That's where they make their money. They make all their money. They make more than all their money. And trying stuff and trying newfangled stuff and failing at it, or having it become a massive quality issue and all those things, there's not a lot of reward for that. And now you add on top of that the thing that, again, Jim Farley talks about a great deal, where if you want to have if you think software-defined vehicles that are updatable over the year and have, coding and electrical architectures are the way forward, and you can't recruit the people who know how to do that kind of stuff, because they would much rather. I was just in Napa Valley. I have fresh firsthand experience of why it's really hard to recruit software engineers to Detroit, because I was in Napa Valley and it was 50, 60 degrees and there's beautiful wineries all over the place. And you got the San Francisco Bay, it's this gorgeous place. And sure, you can't afford to live there, but what the hell, it's gorgeous. And you come back here and it's 5 degrees above zero. There's snow everywhere and you can't walk because there's so much ice. I mean, I'm being a little flippant here, but that's the problem, right? They've got a culture and they've got an infrastructure that has proven very difficult to change. And it's taken, I don't know, I mean, there's probably an argument that they still are trying to figure out how Toyota does lean production, 30, 40 years in. I mean, they're better at it for sure. Absolutely. But, to this day, Toyota makes more money across their lineup, I think, Paul, right? Than Ford or GM do across their lineup.
They do. Yeah. And I would only add, and I'm not quite that old, Steve, but I've read a lot of history books. This industry, and by this industry, I mean primarily Detroit and the major Europeans, are still building cars pretty much the same way they did over 100 years ago. And the cars are still kind of follow the same basic layout: front engine, rear drive, whatever, combustion engine, and then add trucks and SUVs to the wrinkle, and nothing much has really changed in decades here. And that's not a sidestepping or ignoring the fact that Americans are used to what they're used to. So until Detroit and other companies, maybe the Chinese, come up with a better, more attractive formula that is attractive EVs that are easy to charge and have long ranges, I don't know that Americans are going to get jolted out of their long-standing prejudices about mobility.
Yeah. Should we get to questions? Or you have an observation? Yeah.
Our discussion portion by quoting Steve Jobs. As a company, this is where the iPhone comes out every year like clockwork, when it could be a 2 or 3 year old cash cow for them. Steve famously said, if you don't disrupt yourself or cannibalize yourself, someone else will. So we actually only have, I think, one comment, but this is probably a couple minute question and answer because it's pretty philosophical. Joe,
we like philosophy.
If you were a shareholder, would you vote to replace Ford's or GM's leadership? Are they a victim of the changes, or did they screw up? And we know Steve's answer.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm going to hem and haw a little bit because I think to a large extent Ford and GM, the leaderships of Ford and GM have been pushed around by circumstances. Victim's not the word I would use, because they have agency. They're perfectly capable of thinking and acting for themselves. But I do think that they responded to stimulus and literally. I mean, the government of the United States up until January of this past year, or at least for 4 years prior to January of this year, and for many years prior to that, with the exceptions of the 2 Trump administrations, the federal government policy for the automakers was, you all need to clean up, you need to cut your CO2, you need to go electric. And then the Wall Street was amplifying that message by assigning Tesla, massive valuation, and assigning, GM and Ford pitiful valuations. So if you're sitting there as Mary Barra or Jim Farley or, Bill Ford at Ford, and you look and say, okay, well, Wall Street says we need to go electric and be like Tesla. The government says we need to go electric, be like Tesla. Okay, we'll go electric and be like Tesla. And here we are, because the customer, or many of their, especially their customers, said, we don't want to go electric. Not yet. Not under these circumstances, not with those products, not at those costs. So, that's tough. it's tough to say, well, they were all stupid. And they, I think they were responding
I
to
think you're
those
too nice.
inputs. Steve, what do you think? We need to have you on more often. Go on.
I think he still thinks
Yeah,
he's writing for Reuters,
I
where he
just want to
can't be
remind
too judgmental.
that
maybe.
Go on, Steve.
that GM came out with the Volt in way early, before it was known that Tesla was a big success, and Nissan came out with the Leaf before that, right? Before the Volt.
They both came out around 2011,
So
and the Model S came out in
and it's
2012.
true that Obama
Yes,
put
absolutely.
some money in the kitty, but it was $2 billion, literally $2.4 billion. That's right. So, so I don't buy that, that the car makers, were kind of, hoodwinked or kind of, induced. They went in with their eyes open, and they have been. I mean, Detroit and Europe have been erratic. They haven't had vision, and I just don't. I don't think that they. When you act that way, it means you don't know what you're doing. Stopping. That's it.
All right. There we go. Bracing.
Paul,
Merry
Paul, what
Christmas
do
to
you
you.
think?
I'll try and give you 60 seconds or less. This auto industry, and I'm talking primarily ex-China, is an industry that's badly in need of reinvention, probably from the ground up. Can the existing management at Ford, at GM, at Volkswagen, at Nissan, can they reinvent their respective companies? I don't think so. And I don't blame the executives. I'm thinking there's a whole bunch of circumstances that make it difficult, if not impossible. You guys, I think you might be hard pressed. Can you think of another giant company that's completely reinvented itself and survived and prospered? This is going to be a long haul.
Good point. Yeah.
Microsoft?
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, IBM sort of, kind of, maybe, but not at the same size and not in the same. But no, I agree. I think that's the hard part. And again, I think I alluded to this earlier, and I hear this a lot on the tech podcasts I listen to try to understand the world of tech. The Netflix example where, one day their business was shipping CDs, physical CDs to people in the mail. The next day, their business was streaming online and no more CDs. And it was just a big deal. And what was going to happen to their revenue? I imagine that, in fact, the leadership at Netflix had a pretty good path saw a pretty clear path from point A to point B there, and knew they were not going to go broke because their revenue stream was going to dry up and they had nothing coming in the door to keep it going. They knew that. I don't know that the legacy auto companies know the answer to the question, if we just stop building F-150s at Ford or Silverados and Suburbans at GM or C-Class, E-Class at Mercedes, and just throw everything into some new architecture. I don't think they see the path from A to B, or they'd have done it.
Yep. Agree. They're not stupid people.
No, they're not.
I do have one comment. So you gentlemen know that my newsletter is 7 years old. The China EVs and More podcast is 4 or 5 years old. So I've known for at least that long that change was going to happen, disruption was going to happen. So as a CEO of a company, you should have known. Now, I have more issue with, and I think you talk about this, both of you gentlemen talk about this, the culture and the speed at which change happens. Because if you can't learn to build a clean energy vehicle, you will not be competitive globally in the next 5 years. That's a full stop.
Agree.
And so that's my big challenge. I could see it. And again, I was living in China. If I could see it, they have executives that they pay a lot more money than, most of us get paid to see around corners. And all they need to do to see the future is go to China, go to Shenzhen. Full stop, number one. Number two, if we believe that, again, building a car is going to be commoditized, does Mary know what computer languages their software is being coded in? Because that's the leadership. They need to understand that. That's why Sterling Anderson is there. That's why Doug Field is there. And maybe this next generation of leadership, because there's this Game of Thrones going on at GM with Sterling, I think, putting his own generals in there. And I think that's the right way to do it. Doug Field, does he have aspirations to replace Jim Farley? I don't know, but that's probably the right move. Now, you had mentioned this a couple months ago, Joe. We might have a CEO at GM and Ford that doesn't live in Michigan for the first time. Maybe that's what it takes in order to be a technology company. But I do place more blame, not so much on Jim Farley, because he had Mark Fields, he had, a couple other people in front of him, but Mary's overseeing all of this. And then if we pull out a little bit further, Volkswagen Group, because Bluma was at the helm at Porsche, and Porsche is like all-time lows from a sales volume standpoint kind of thing. Anyways, we can leave it at that, gentlemen. This has been an amazing discussion. I will hopefully get this posted in the next couple of days so many more people can view it. But first of all, let me say happy holidays to all of you gentlemen. And I look forward to talking with you all in the new year, personally and virtually. So
Likewise. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
thanks for joining us. Steve,
All right.
we'll see you,
Bye-bye.
man.